Jen Kiggans, Congresswoman, again, District 2, and our own Jernara, doing an interview today. Let's go ahead and listen in on what the Congresswoman had to say. She, of course, was part of a bipartisan health care proposal, one of those proposals that Katie Labasca was talking about during her time with us here on Live Impact this morning. So let's listen in to the Congresswoman.
Happy Friday.
Thank you.
All right. Congresswoman Kiggans, thank you for joining us today to talk about the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. So let's start with talking about some of the big wins for our military community here in Hampton Roads, like the quality of life improvements. What will sailors and the military in general notice in the next year or two?
Yeah, so this year's NDAA, which passed out of the House of Representatives this week on a very bipartisan vote, had a lot of wins for our military overall, and especially for the military families and uniformed people in our district. First of all, there's a 3.8% pay raise. That's something that I wish it was more. We always wish it was more. We can never thank and pay them enough for the work that they do, but that's an important pay raise. We also had funding, $1.5 billion for housing improvements. This has been a passion project of mine, just securing better housing. We know that we can do better for especially on the unaccompanied side, people who are living on base, and in military family housing. So we actually dedicated a significant portion. The Secretary of War has a housing task force, so I'm looking forward to seeing what's going to come out of that to make sure that we're directing those funds properly. There was funding for child development centers. We know that we need more child care on the active duty side on base, so there's funding for that. There's also some provisions for DoD schools. We're looking at no cell phone policies in DoD schools and making sure that we have adequate infrastructure there. And then on the healthcare side, we changed some of the licensure requirements to make it quicker for healthcare providers to actually serve our military families. We also put in provisions for people who had pediatric illnesses but maybe want to join our military. We made sure that there's uniform accession standards so that they're not struggling with out-of-date diagnoses that might prohibit them from serving. Also made sure that they know of other options and ways they can serve the country. Things like skilled trades. We certainly need, as many people as we can get to recruit and retain the best and brightest. So some really good quality of life wins in there. We also looked at quality of life for our military Sea Lift Command. We do a lot of talking about their role in complementing our military and filling gaps right now on the civilian mariner side. And so we removed a pay cap requirement for our MSC folks, and then we also made sure that they had the privilege of shopping at the commissaries and exchanges. So that was a nice thing that we could give them as well to thank them. So a lot of great wins for our district. There's a home porting change requirement, so we increased from 12 to 18 months. If there's a work that needs to be done for ship repair, it has to be greater than 18 months to be able to be considered for other parts of the East Coast. Right now, that requirement is 12 months. So we're seeing a lot. We lose work to other parts of the East Coast because it's a 12-month requirement. So extending it to 18 months requires the Navy to do more work here in Hampton Roads.
All very important things for our service members day to day. Also in the NDAA is a plan to clean up PFAS at military sites. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because that's something we've seen in Hampton Roads.
Yeah, so I've introduced just freestanding legislation to address this issue of PFAS in our water supply. We know that it's unfortunately there. We are working to clean that. So putting funding towards that. We also had funding that's dedicated towards the NASA wallops. This is an issue as well, but making sure clean water, the PFAS issue needs to be dealt with. So the fact that Congress is prioritizing that and providing that funding to get that out of our drinking water and make sure our military families are safe was important.
Let's see. Very much so. I know we've had the issues at Fentress, and like you mentioned, NASA wallops and getting that more cleaned up. Going back to the topic of healthcare, we obviously stood up a new clinic in Hampton Roads in Chesapeake earlier this year. So in the NDAA, what aspects of it really help support staffing clinics like that and even bringing more clinics or facilities to the region in the future?
Yeah, that licensure piece to make sure that we are tweaking some of the licensure requirements to making it a much quicker process to get new healthcare providers into our military system has been important. We're always looking at TRICARE, ways that we can improve that for our military families, but making sure we're compensating also our physicians who are caring for military families is an important piece. As a nurse practitioner, I certainly prioritize ways we can improve healthcare for the military, and that's something we work on every day.
Definitely. Were there any provisions that you would have wanted to see in this bill or that you want to, maybe bring up in the future to further support our military?
Yeah, we push for changes with military children right now. Civilian insurance allows our military children to stay on plans up to age 26, but we don't have that same provisions. They can stay on TRICARE as long as they're in college full time, but then military families are having to pay for children between the ages of when they graduate from college and 26. So it's not the same coverage that our civilian partners provide. And so we've tried for many years, we'll continue to push to try to have our military young adults, covered for that gap period. That's something we push for. There's funding. We just introduced a bill yesterday, freestanding for silver sneakers for our older adults to be covered at some of our parks and rec centers. That's something that we've pushed for in the past. But for me, it's the quality of life piece is not just as much of a pay raise as we can give them, but the housing piece, the health care, the child care, and the spouse employment. How are we supporting our spouses also? Those will continue to be priorities of mine going forward.
Definitely. And one question about something that's causing a little bit of a controversy in the NDAA, which is not necessarily related to Hampton Roads, but the airspace issue at Reagan International, that there was more access given to the military in that airspace near that airport. And obviously, at the beginning of the year, there was that very tragic crash between a commercial plane and a military helicopter. Do you feel like there needs to be more work or more conversation on that issue to ensure that both civilians and military are as safe as they can be at Reagan?
Yes. As a former Navy helicopter pilot, I certainly understand the importance of flight rules and regulations. And there are other vehicles that we can accomplish these same and address these aviation safety issues. The squadron, for example, can make their flight rules so that they are either restrictive at times of day or around certain civilian airports, as we see here in Washington. But the fact that one provision is absent, not ideal, but there are other vehicles that exist that we can accomplish these same safety priorities. So the onus is on the military to make sure that we are staying out of that airspace, which is civilian, very heavily used airspace, should be protective. But again, there's a lot of internal flight rules and regulations that can be set at the squadron level. I expect to see that from the military. They know that, and based on the accident that happened, it's a very tricky airspace to navigate. So we need to make sure that and Congress can be watching as well. But the onus really is on the military to make sure that they steer way clear of that civilian airspace.
Right. And final question, I know that the NDAA passed with bipartisan support, which I think is something the American people are probably happy to hear right now, to see Congress working together. What do you think it was about this bill and this process that made it possible to get it through at a bipartisan level?
I think both sides of the aisle in Congress prioritize national security. There should be no question. And I sit on Armed Services Committee, which is a very bipartisan committee. We frequently share the same viewpoint, and there are many veterans on that committee, and I think we all speak the same language, which goes a long way. But I think it just speaks to the fact that the world is not a safe place right now. We all recognize that there are challenges. We are asking our military men and women and their families to do so much right now. So both sides of the aisle would agree on that issue, and I'm thankful that there's agreement and that there was great bipartisan support for this year's NDAA.
All right, Congresswoman Kiggans, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, good to see you. Have a good weekend.
You too.
All right, back here in the live Impact News studio after that interview with Congresswoman Jen Kiggans, joining 13 News Now for a little bit of time earlier today, which we greatly appreciate as always.